Today on Some Assembly Required. In 2019, the number of mass shootings across the United States has outpaced the number of days this year. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at this issue and ways in which it's being addressed around the country and in our state with State Representative Melissa Sargent. This is Some Assembly Required, a podcast hosted by the Wisconsin Assembly Democratic Caucus discussing what's happening in the state capitol and all things Wisconsin. I'm your host, Assembly Democratic Leader Gordon Hintz, representing the 54th Assembly District and the city of Oshkosh. The ongoing gun violence tragedies show no signs of subsiding, with less and less time between these horrific incidents. The issue of mass shootings remains unique to the United States, and the numbers versus other countries are not even close. As of September 1st of 2019, there have been 283 mass shootings, according to the Gun Violence Archive, a nonprofit group that tracks every mass shooting in the United States. Democrats and Republicans in Washington, D.C., and even the president himself have publicly stated that we must take measures to reduce gun violence and promote gun safety. And last week at the federal level, the House Judiciary Committee approved a proposal to implement extreme risk protection orders. The obvious issue is trying to keep firearms out of the hands of dangerous individuals. While we know that's a challenge, we've seen states take action, and we know that government needs to try to do everything possible to protect the public. Here in Wisconsin, after the tragedies in Ohio and Texas, Governor Evers reached out to Republican leaderships to pursue universal background checks in a bipartisan effort. However, those efforts were rejected despite popular support from the public, 80% of who support background checks on private gun sales and gun shows, public support as well for extreme protection orders, which we're going to talk about shortly. The public has an expectation that government should do everything possible to reduce the risk of gun violence, and it's unacceptable for Republican leadership to say they don't think there's anything that we should be doing at the state level to keep our residents safer. Simply punting and saying there's nothing we can do, tragedy after tragedy, is not responsible for leadership at the state level to do. Democrats in the legislature believe in safe gun ownership, and we understand that our Second Amendment rights come with a responsibility and that we need to do everything possible to reduce gun violence and promote firearm safety. I'm really excited today that we have State Representative Melissa Sargent, my colleague, representing the 48th Assembly District and the north and far east sides of Madison. Welcome, Melissa.
Thanks for having me, Gordon.
You bet. So, on the gun violence issue, you want to discuss a little bit about why is this a public health crisis?
Well, quite frankly, all too often we're presented with a false dichotomy when it comes to gun violence in our country and our state. Quite frankly, people toot a message that we have to choose between protecting the Second Amendment and preventing gun violence in our communities. And frankly, that is so far from the truth that it stinks with partisanship. I know that we just went through the period of sending our kids back to school in the great state of Wisconsin. And there were too many parents that were worried about what their kids were going to experience at school. And frankly, too many kids, including my own, worried about what might happen to them at school as well. We've seen gun violence affect people in places of worship here in the state of Wisconsin. We've seen gun violence affect people in their own homes, in their bedrooms, on their grandparents' lap here in the state of Wisconsin. We have seen gun violence affect people where they recreate here in the great state of Wisconsin. And this doesn't follow our values. We know that we can roll up our sleeves and solve problems when we prioritize that. And unfortunately, it has turned into a partisan conversation in our state. It is vital that we look at gun violence through a lens of public health. Gun violence is the leading cause of premature death in the United States, with nearly 40,000 innocent lives taken annually. This is an enormous number. And quite frankly, we need to start treating it with the importance and respect that we treat issues of the same magnitude.
And you've been, this isn't just this year. As long as I've known you and as long as your time in the legislature, this is something that you've been really proactive of. And I know you've also authored the universal background check bill. But the balancing act here is, especially in a place like Wisconsin, where hunting is a national pastime, where gun ownership rates are high, and where 99.9% of people are responsible gun owners. The issue seems to be really about how do we, it's, with so many firearms around the country and with such easy access, it's really about what can be done to make sure firearms don't get in the hands of those who are who are a threat to the public and are dangerous. Besides the background check bill, I mentioned earlier the extreme risk protection order. Could you talk a little bit about that initiative, that bill, and how that would ultimately work?
Absolutely. So extreme risk protection orders, or ERPO bills, as some people refer to them, have gained a wide breadth of bipartisan support with folks, including the NRA and including our current president, talking about the importance of this pragmatic and common sense legislation. We have seen doctors and social workers and business owners as well stand up and say that we need to do something different and that this is a good solution. Extreme risk laws will help to ensure that in temporary crisis situations, we don't have permanent and deadly tragedy occur. And at the end of the day, this allows folks to go before a judge and ask that judge, by giving examples of dangerous behaviors and concerning behaviors, whether or not they believe that a temporary order should be instituted in the very same way that we use temporary orders and injunction processes when it comes to domestic violence in the state of Wisconsin.
Do you, so in this case, it is trying to create a process for when and how we would be able to intervene to keep, firearms out of the hands of someone who would be deemed a threat? Is that how we?
Yes, that's absolutely the case.
How many have other states done this, and do you know how many that have passed it at this point?
So extreme risk protection orders are not something that is unique to the state of Wisconsin. 17 other states and the District of Columbia have implemented extreme risk protection orders, very similar to the one that we are proposing here in the state of Wisconsin. And we know, based on real scientific data, that they have reduced deaths in those states. For example, in Connecticut, after this bill passed, we saw a reduction of almost 14% of suicide by firearm in that state. And we know that every one life that we can save is important, but that's a pretty staggering statistic. And in the state of Wisconsin, we're seeing death by suicide increasing at pretty exponential rates. This is something that will, when instituted, though we know that there's not one single policy that can solve this problem of gun violence in our state, that this is one of them that will ensure that we save lives.
What kind of, I've had conversations with conservatives, with other folks who seem to think that this is something that makes sense, but they raise concerns about, does it hold up constitutionally, from Second Amendment advocates, and can you talk about maybe how you address that issue?
Yes, absolutely. I very much believe that this piece of legislation, the conversation surrounding extreme risk protection orders, is something that will stand up constitutionally. It allows judges and the judicial process to be able to stand in the circle and make these decisions, and it provides a very clear process for people to ensure that their rights are being protected through a due process situation. And that is really important to me. And it's also very important to me that people can't make false allegations. And this legislation that I have crafted takes that very seriously and make sure that folks know that if they were to make false allegations against someone, that there's pretty grave consequences for that.
And as I understand it, in the 17 other states and District of Columbia, those laws, have been upheld as constitutional for many of the reasons that I think you stated in terms of how they were designed. You mentioned suicide numbers because I think when you look at the gun deaths nationally, suicides are one of the highest, if not the highest. I know you also serve on the task force on suicide prevention, and I know when we talk suicide, part of the reason firearms are such a risk is because they usually work, meaning someone who chooses another means may not be successful and therefore could have an intervention and might be able to have a second chance. What's the discussion been like on the task force? And has there been any kind of support for extreme risk protection orders or even other measures that recognize that probably the most data-driven, smartest thing that we could do would be to look at minimizing suicides by trying to keep firearms not accessible by folks that are a risk to themselves?
Absolutely. Access to firearms triples the risk of one's death by suicide. The lethality of guns is real. And we know that in the state of Wisconsin, our suicide numbers have risen by nearly 40% between the years of 2000 and 2017. This isn't something that we can't take action on. And quite frankly, I am really honored to have a seat at the table on the Suicide Prevention Task Force. But one of the things that I have been really touched by are the people who have come out across the state of Wisconsin, regardless of what city we are in and regardless of really what the conversation is revolving around, and talking about how death by firearms is something that is so lethal and has impacted so many different people, whether we're talking about farmers or whether we're talking about first responders or whether we're talking about young people who are in crisis because it's a really hard time to be growing up. Death by suicide with firearms is a real fact in the state of Wisconsin. And we have had some really compelling and touching testimony from people who have come forward and talked about how guns have been involved in their lives and ended the lives of people who they love dearly. Unfortunately, it seems as if the task force is not going to be taking up any legislation in regards to guns when we are bringing forward policy to address what it is that we've been talking about across the state of Wisconsin. I know that much of the policy that will come forward is going to be pragmatic and it's going to be common sense and it will save lives. But I think it's really unfortunate that this task force is falling onto the sidelines in the same way that too many of the legislators in this building are influenced by big money and third-party groups like the NRA, and they aren't brave enough to bring forward policy that addresses gun violence.
Just speaking to that, do you get the feeling in individual talks or anyone else? Do you think it is just mostly people don't want to take on the team or the brand or face people that oppose any kind of gun regulation? Have they indicated, well, we can't, I would like to support it, or do you think it's just hard for them to, we're kind of seeing this struggle take place with Republicans, even nationally, and sometimes you see people that are closer to an incident of gun violence finally have enough and be willing to stand up and say we need to do something. Do you think it is sort of a top-down, we're not going to support these kind of things, and there's instructions on that? When they first said they were going to take up a suicide task force, I thought, they're finally going to take some action on gun violence. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Well,
unfortunately, even us in the legislature have been touched by a colleague of ours who ended his life with a gun. And the lethality of guns and the reality of suicide in the state of Wisconsin are true, honest-to-goodness facts. And there is no denying that. I do think that it is really unfortunate that this task force is falling down the same lines as so many other policies here in the Capitol building, where partisanship is inserting itself into conversations that on the outside of the Capitol building, in the real world, where ordinary, fabulous Wisconsinites live and recreate and raise their families, they're asking for common sense gun reform. They are asking for quality health care and an investment in our education and protection of our environment. But politicians in the state capitol are too often being guided by leaders on the other side of the aisle, the GOP, unfortunately, that is influenced by money and power. And the voices of ordinary Wisconsinites are not being heard in this building. And that's why I feel so passionately about introducing legislation like the Extreme Risk Protection Order and universal background checks, because I know that so many people across the state of Wisconsin, whether they own guns or not, whether they are members of the NRA, whether they're urban or rural, whether they're male or female, support these pieces of legislation. And at the end of the day, it's our jobs as elected officials to hear the voices of the people of our communities, lift them up and bring them into the building and introduce policies that match what it is that they're asking for. I hope that one day soon, we're going to have some brave members on the other side of the aisle stand up and say, enough with the silly games that have been occurring in this building. I hear these voices, and I am going to be brave, and I'm going to break this deadlock and do some good work.
Well, thank you for all your work on those bills and for your longtime advocacy on this and many other issues. Let's pivot a little bit back into you. You were elected first in 2012. Can you remember the exact moment you decided to run for state assembly?
I can remember the exact moment I decided to run for state assembly. Those who know me know that I am a proud mom of 4 sons, and this was right around the time of the Act 10 protests, when Governor Walker was introducing union-busting policies, and there were hundreds of thousands of people around the Capitol building carrying signs and asking how this can be the case. This isn't what we learned in 4th grade about how government works. My 2 older sons were in their very early double-digit ages, and they decided one day to make a sign all on their own on the floor of my kitchen with their Crayola markers, and it was a beautiful sign that said the word solidarity. And they asked me to bring them to the Capitol. It was a weekend in March, and I explained to them we had grocery shopping to do and laundry to do, and I'm absolutely happy to bring them to the Capitol so they can hold their sign, because it had been a while since they'd been here, but we weren't going to be able to stay for very long. And they were pretty convincing kids, and we did that. As I was holding my youngest son, who I'm not sure could even walk yet, or maybe he was just learning to walk, and I had a kindergartner as well, they held a sign on the first floor of the Capitol building, and were approached by the police. And the Capitol Police asked them to remove the sign because of an ordinance violation by DOA. And my 2 sons talked to the police officer about the difference between a state ordinance and their First Amendment rights. And my jaw dropped as they were having this conversation. And I let them kind of run the rest of the day. We didn't get home at a very reasonable time because I was pretty quickly detained because I didn't make my kids take that sign down and issued a citation for that act of civil disobedience. And my kids really are the reason why I'm here, because I decided that if we had a government that was doing that to children, that the faces of government needed to change.
Wow. Tell us a little bit about your district. I mean, I think it's easy for those of us that are outstate to say, oh, yeah, they're somewhere down in Dane County. What's unique to your district? What should people know about, your assembly seat?
So the 48th Assembly District is located on the north and east sides of the city of Madison. It also includes the village of Maple Bluff. So I have the great honor of representing Governor Tony Evers and his lovely wife, Kathy. We have state parks and county parks and city parks, being able to spend time outside and enjoy the natural world around us is something that's very important to my constituents. We have a lot of diversity, blue-collar workers, a lot of people with different ethnic backgrounds, and really earnest, hardworking people that I see as the fabric of our state, who are, at the end of the day, my bosses. And I love listening to them and learning from them about what matters and having the opportunity to elevate their voices here in the Capitol building.
What's your favorite part of the job?
My favorite part of the job, I think, is getting to know my constituents on a more personal level, especially when I have the opportunity to go into schools and meet with the young people who call Wisconsin home, listening to them talk about what their dreams are and being able to take those dreams back into the Capitol building and weave them into the policies that I fight for here, ensuring that Wisconsin is a place that our kids can dream and feel safe in. That's absolutely my favorite part of the job.
What's your least favorite part of the job?
Well, I would say one of the, I don't know if I have a least part of the job, but that I favor the least, I would say maybe the unpredictability of the schedule, not being home with my kids when it's bedtime, or disappointing them when I am not able to attend field trips. But I also know that my kids are really proud of me for the work that I'm doing and that they're pretty forgiving. So we're a team. We work together, and certainly this isn't something that I do on my own.
Briefly, because I want to get to some of our other speed round questions, you're really, I think, one of the most prolific members in terms of legislation you introduce. What kind of stuff are you working on now, or what kind of bills would you hope to see, get past this session, or at least, get traction on?
Well, a girl's got a dream. Someday we're going to legalize pot in the state of Wisconsin for recreational purposes. So I'd say as far as hours spent on a weekly basis, that's where I'm rolling up my sleeves and digging in the deepest. I am really proud to be introducing and talking about the importance of pollinators in the state of Wisconsin, making sure that we continue to fight for menstrual equality and a seat at the table for women in politics and leveling that playing field, making sure that communities of color and folks that aren't represented adequately have a voice and have been heard, as well as the gun violence policies that I have been working very hard on.
All right. Well, now we're up to the favorite part of everybody, some assembly required, the speed round questions. So don't think too long on these. What's your pre-session ritual when the assembly's in session? Do you have a thing that you do regularly?
I've got to get a Dr. Pepper.
Okay. It's a drink of champions. What's your late night session order when we're going to be there late? What's your comfort food go-to?
It's an exciting day when I can order French fries.
French fries. Amy Poehler or Tina Fey?
Amy Poehler.
The sun or the moon?
Oh, I can't choose on that one. I'm sorry.
I knew that would be tough. The East Coast or the West Coast?
East Coast.
Favorite place in Wisconsin that's not Madison or Oshkosh?
Oh, I was going to say Oshkosh. I can't believe you took that one away from me.
Well, I didn't want you to choose between Madison and Oshkosh.
Buried deep in the woods where my cell phone doesn't work.
Hunting or fishing?
Fishing.
Your favorite shiro?
Oh, my goodness. My grandma.
Taco Bell or Taco John's?
Neither, please.
Barbecue or fish fry?
Fish fry.
Reese's or Snickers?
Reese's.
Dane County Board or Wisconsin State Assembly?
Oh, my heart really is with local government still. I loved serving on the Dane County Board and the effectiveness of it, but I am so proud of the work that I'm doing in the Assembly and wouldn't trade it for a minute.
Which drives you more crazy, Ironman or CrossFit Games?
Oh, boy. I think the Ironman. They sure do walk around like little peacocks.
Yeah, which makes you feel worse about not going to the gym.
About me, right? It's all about me.
It's a tough time for all of us here. Taylor Swift or Lizzo?
Lizzo.
Facebook or Instagram?
Facebook.
Your favorite entrance to the Capitol?
The west entrance, Upstate Street.
The mullet haircut or a man bun?
Man bun. That's the favorite of my boys right now.
Kids. Kids. There's more than mullet in my era. Favorite food cart?
I like the Bonzo food cart.
And do you have a favorite politician of all time, of any era? Is there somebody that you have always looked up to, identify with, or think is great?
It's changed over time. I think that President Obama is pretty amazing, and I look at all the things that he did, but I also have such an appreciation for the quiet leadership of Jimmy Carter. And even after he wasn't the president, and he's, I don't know, he's very old now, and he's still out there building houses and making a difference in our community with such a kind heart. And I really respect and look up to that.
It feels like he's timeless. It's knitting or crocheting?
Knitting, you know that. On the floor of the assembly, of course.
I just wanted to make you answer. Favorite song to karaoke to?
Oh, I don't karaoke. I'll cheer you on.
When you're in the car, what's your karaoke song?
Oh.
What are you singing along to? Even the wrong words? Because that's what I do. I'm like, oh my God, those are the words.
That's probably a Blondie song.
Okay. Well, that is it. Thank you very much, Representative Melissa Sargent, for being on the show. That's it for this week's Some Assembly Required. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio. Subscribe and leave us a review. Thank you to our guest representative, Melissa Sargent, to our executive producer, Shinya Tao. Until next week, this is Assembly Democratic Leader Gordon Hintz.